Hello and welcome back to the Football Fan Fanatics Podcast. I'm James Palin and joining me once again is my mum, Nadine Dereza. There might be no football on, the World Cup may be over, but there's still plenty to talk about. That is the nature of football. And in today's episode, we have so much to discuss, starting with FIFA's plans to sell stakes in its competitions to private investors, including the crown jewels, the World Cup. We'll also be talking about Roberto Mancini's appointment as Italy head coach and what that signifies in the months ahead, especially about the recent Pirlo debacle too. We'll also be assessing the expectations for Xabi Alonso's first season as Chelsea in the Premier League. But let's start off with the World Cup. It's the biggest story in town right now. Gianni Infantino once again taking the headlines. A controversial proposal over how FIFA intends to part fund future major international tournaments, including the World Cup. And this obviously has already provoked a furious backlash from UEFA, announcing a boycott if the proposals are voted through by member associations, with all 55 UEFA nations boycotting this. So what is all this fuss about? FIFA wants to create a new commercial subsidiary to run its main events, with external investors offered the chance to buy stakes in it, with the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, calling it the democratization of football. But when FIFA announced plans to sell stakes in its competitions to private investors, the reaction from fans, politicians, and some of football's governing bodies was not gratitude, it was fury. FIFA's pitch sounds simple, at least on paper. $40 million for every FIFA member country, released once the deal goes through, to help develop the game. Although, interestingly, to those that wouldn't have agreed to it would have only got $10 million. Infantino has given football federations a deadline to sign on it if they want the first slice of that money. That is looming. It's only 6 or 7 weeks away, the September the 19th, 2026 to be precise. But critics of the plan aren't buying the framing, including UEFA, the governing body of European football. UEFA has gone on record saying FIFA is trying to enrich itself and its friends. Even the UK's defence secretary weighed in, saying the World Cup is not FIFA's to sell. Andy Burnham too produced a video on social media, also alluding to what I've just said. So today, we're going to explore why FIFA and UEFA are now in open conflict and whether this investment plan still has legs before September's deadline. So interesting. And Nadine, just to be clear, what exactly is FIFA proposing here? What stakes are they planning to sell?
Well, hi, James. Yeah, FIFA wants to sell a 20% minority stake in a new $20 billion commercial subsidiary called FIFA Forward Enterprise to run its main events. And my understanding is that that stake up for grabs is in its commercial and events operations, which of course includes the World Cup, which is why it's getting all the headlines around the world. And this 20% stake will be sold to outside investors, folding them in to this new commercial subsidiary. And this 20% minority stake sold to private institutional investors represents raising just over $4 billion from them, with FIFA insisting it will retain majority board control and exclusive authority over all sporting and regulatory decisions. And it's been at pains, particularly over the last 24 hours, to re-emphasise that point. In exchange, FIFA says it will distribute a $10 billion funding package to its 211 member associations, with each getting up to $40 million once the deal is finalised. So the member associations would get an initial, I think, $20 million payment, which roughly equates to 15 million pounds, if you like your money in Great British sterling. But the associations that don't sign on by September the 19th would instead get a smaller existing development fund. So quite confusing, all these figures. But I think it's worth looking at who is involved in this investment fund and how are they connected to President Donald Trump, which I think, James, you've been investigating.
Yeah, and these connections to Donald Trump really don't seem to be going away, and it doesn't necessarily look great from the outlook. Well, let's look into it. So the investment fund involved is called Thrive Capital. That's run by Josh Kushner, who's the brother-in-law to Ivanka Trump, with the US bank JP Morgan involved. Now, FIFA has also named Greg Maffei, a past Trump campaign donor and former Liberty Media president, as a key commercial advisor on the deal. And we've seen, Nadine, this isn't a one-off. Infantino has spent years courting Trump directly, creating a FIFA Peace Prize for him, opening a FIFA office in Trump Tower, and letting the Club World Cup trophy sit in the Oval Office. And if you remember, Donald Trump was on the stage for that Club World Cup trophy lift. He even tried to be for the World Cup as well before Gianni Infantino had to usher him off.
Or did he succeed though? He still stayed on stage.
He did. Infantino seems to be his little puppet. He can't really get much control of him. But my question is, Nadine, why do you think Infantino wants to rush this plan through? And do you think he has the power and the votes to get his way?
Well, FIFA decisions like this only need a simple majority. In theory, it just needs more than half of the 211 members. So it needs 106 votes to pass it. And Infantino, up until this point, and you've talked about it as well, has built up a decade of loyalty among federations in Africa, Asia and the Americas through that expansion of the last World Cup, including 48 teams, which saw broadcast revenues rise, and FIFA's direct funding programme have also helped nurture that loyalty. And I think for those smaller federations, a windfall of this size could dwarf what they'd normally earn over several years, which could make this offer hard to refuse if you're, one of those smaller federations. But Miguel Madero, who obviously has got a bit of beef because he left FIFA after 10 months, he chaired FIFA's governance committee before resigning, says there's little transparency about how national federations actually spend the money FIFA sends them already. So will it go into what, Infantino and FIFA intend it to, or do they really care? He argues, Miguel, that FIFA runs on a patronage system and describes this proposal bluntly as a legalised bribe. I mean, he's been quoted in numerous sources over the last couple of days. And I've also heard that FIFA already holds roughly $4 billion in reserves, which would be enough to fund further development without selling off any stake to private investors. But, in balance, private investment is not new in sport. Institutional private equity capital in sports rights is really an established capital structure. You just have to look at some of the European leagues to see it in operation. But in this case, I think the key concern centres on the speed of the push. It's been announced sort of overnight, and there's a deadline looming, as you've said. Also, the other concern is the political ties of the anchor investor, Thrive Capital, and that upcoming September the 19th deadline imposed for national federations to accept payouts. Usually for something as big as this, you need a longer consultation period. You need to engage stakeholders. People need a chance to properly explore the proposals. And it doesn't feel as though people and federations are given the chance here in this case. But it's who buys the rights, controls, the governance, which really makes the difference for the long-term integrity of the sport. And there's no doubt that FIFA have blindsided football confederations around the world. And really, all the projects that I've been involved with in the years, whether it's in football, business or sports, if you want to build a better community, and in this case, a better footballing community for the future, you've got to include the whole community from the start. You've got to build the community from the ground upwards. You shouldn't hear about a significant change, which this is, through the media. It's just not on. So I can understand why there has been a backlash, as you said, fury over it.
Yeah, and we definitely need to factor in UEFA's response too. And we've already brushed over it, but it's worth noting too that Alexander Ceferin, president of UEFA, boycotted this year's World Cup final between Spain and Argentina, and that was after FIFA, of course, overturned Balogun's suspension following Donald Trump's intervention, the infamous call to the White House. And UEFA is repeatedly at odds from FIFA policy on issues like ticket pricing and hydration breaks. And on this scheme, UEFA has publicly accused FIFA of trying to enrich itself and its allies at football's expense. And UEFA just held an emergency meeting, as I said previously, of their 55 member associations who have all agreed to boycott FIFA tournaments. And yeah, wow, it's really interesting to see if Gianni Infantino does go ahead with this plan to sell stakes in the World Cup to private investors? Because if he does, we could be seeing a World Cup with no Europe, and then it's not really a World Cup, it's a half Globe Cup. So Nadine, what do you think of the European nations' agreement to boycott FIFA tournaments over this?
Yeah, I mean, it was monumental, wasn't it? But I mean, UEFA have been clear this week that there was a significant and growing opposition to FIFA's scheme, saying it's time to prioritise associations, clubs, leagues, players, and of course fans. And to put a stop to it, they had to go for the nuclear option, which is what this announcement is, regardless of the fact that Europe is central to hosting the 2030 World Cup, with Spain and Portugal hosting most matches alongside Morocco. There's a lot of jeopardy here, so they know that in 4 years' time, if they carry on with this boycott, if FIFA win through this proposal, then there's going to be a World Cup elsewhere without Europe involved. And Spain also is currently pushing to host the final. So, they haven't voted through this lightly to boycott it. So I think a boycott threat is a serious card to play. But on the one hand, UEFA's 55 votes can't outvote Infantino's broader coalition. But I think UEFA standing united would kill off his plans to sell stakes in their tournaments to private investors. I mean, I think the key thing to consider, do FIFA need UEFA more than UEFA needs them? Or is it the other way around? Let me say that again, because I think I stumbled over my words. Do FIFA need UEFA more than UEFA needs them? Or is it the other way around? But I think either way, football power structure and FIFA's relationship with Europe looks set to shift significantly in the weeks ahead. And just to be clear, the UEFA boycott will cover all FIFA competitions, including the Men's and World Cups and also the Club World Cup. And the boycott would be triggered if these proposals are voted through by member associations. So CONCACAF, is it CONCACAF?
CONCACAF.
CONCACAF. I always find that one difficult to say. CONCACAF, with 41 votes, who govern North and Central American football, if you don't know who they are, have also rejected the plans. So add that to 55 votes from UEFA. So 55 plus 41, you get 96 votes out of the total of 211. So in theory, at this stage, this FIFA proposal could go ahead, because as I said earlier, FIFA just need a majority of 106. And this situation makes me remember, very briefly, the European Super League project announced in 2021. I'm sure you remember that just 5 years ago. I mean, you were 15 at the time, but you were, massively into football. And you may remember, James, there was a huge backlash against the teams who initially wanted to get involved. And that project was stopped before it really got started. But, I mean, Real Madrid, among others, certainly didn't bask themselves in glory over this affair. And actually, UEFA only reached an agreement of principles for the well-being of European club football with Real Madrid and the European Football Clubs group this year, finally putting to bed the European Super League project. So, that was at speed. I mean, the fans, obviously, there was a huge backlash there. There was a lot of protests. I mean, we're still out of season at the moment. So, we haven't seen fans galvanise at the moment. We've just seen federations. But, interesting to see if, fans and players and key opponents of big projects like the European Super League can put that one to bed. Then maybe ultimately this one will go to bed as well.
Yeah, it's really difficult because obviously nations as communities are probably a bit more spread out than clubs are. So getting protests organised is on a bigger scale, and it's more difficult. But regardless of what the fans do, they'll make enough noise online, as they already have done. And what we've seen, obviously, with the boycotts, you'd hope that FIFA and Gianni Infantino do recognise that they can't go on like this. But whatever happens on that September the 19th, this fight is clearly more about money. It's about who actually controls the World Cup and whether FIFA's members decide that, or a handful of private investors and a president determined to consolidate his legacy. So this is a story, no doubt, Nadine and I will be returning to in the coming weeks, and we'll be very excited or a little bit in trepidation about what potentially could be happening.
I
But
don't know
let's
about
part
excited, I'm worried. I'm meant to be independent, but I'm showing my colours here. So, yeah, I just think it goes back to you include stakeholders from the ground upwards. And sometimes I wonder, something like as big as this, is there something else he's trying to get through? So if you create a lot of noise over in this area, you push through other things in another area. I've seen that in business so many times, and it's just made me a little bit suspicious. He knows surely how people are going to react. But yeah, so definitely not excited about it, James. You might be, but I'm not.
Well, I just think, again, I said it at the start, it's incredible that the World Cup's over, the Premier League's still a few weeks away, and football's still in the headlines, which just shows the power of the sport. And to continue on with that, let's look at the Italian situation with their head coach. And this is a really interesting story to pick up on. So Roberto Mancini is back as Italy's head coach. He had previous form in the job, obviously winning the Euro 2020 title, which didn't really want to read out because I was there myself, having to see England lose on a penalty shootout. But he also had a world record unbeaten run, so you can't dispute him doing well. Obviously, missing out on the 2022 World Cup was a shame and led to him losing his job. But he's a winner with the Euros, and they've got the Euros next coming up, so not necessarily a bad decision. So he's returning to an Italian federation that, let's be honest, is in disarray. Gattuso left in the spring after Italy missed the third straight World Cup, with their federation president also resigning, which is just incredible. No Italy at a World Cup, just it never feels right. And a new president came in promising a brave and successful, humble yet ambitious new era, as he described it, and then handed the keys to Paolo Maldini, hiring him as technical director to rebuild the national team from the academy up. So Maldini's first important job was to find the coach. He was very ambitious. To be truthful, we initially approached Pep Guardiola, who said no. Pep wants to continue his time away from football, though he did say he would like to return to international management, but maybe just not yet. Then next up was Carlo Ancelotti, who of course we know is Italian, but he also said no because he's staying with the Brazilian Federation. Of course, he just joined them and didn't have the most successful World Cup, getting knocked out in the round of 16 against Norway. Then just a few days ago, Andrea Pirlo came into the frame, and this is perhaps the most controversial part of it because it was discovered his ties to a Russian betting company were evident, which blew up into a full-blown scandal with public and political backlash in Italy, making the appointment essentially untenable, and the federation pulled the plug. And that was the final straw for Paolo Maldini, who resigned within 16 days of taking the job. And the door reopened for Roberto Mancini to step in as Italy's head coach once again. And it's bonkers, really, because when you think of Paolo Maldini for how incredible he was as a footballer. Of course, the AC Milan centre-half is arguably the greatest of all time, and what he did at Italy will be remembered. So it's crazy how someone's legacy can be shaken up like that in less than 20 days. But I guess my question for you, Nadine, is can Italy actually move forward from here? Are they going to get out this revolving door of not getting into World Cups, or, you know, does this look like a bold new era or just more of the same?
I love the word bonkers, by the way. There was a nightclub in Birmingham called Bonkers I used to go to when I was a student. Sorry, I haven't heard that word for a long time. Sorry, back to your question. Just zooming out a bit, I think since winning the World Cup in 2006, Italy, let's remind ourselves, have crashed out in the group stage twice.
Yeah.
And in 2010 and 2014, that's when they crashed out of the group stage. And then they missed qualification 3 times, if I'm right in remembering, 2018, 2022, and then 2026 are basically the last 3 occasions, which is just not good enough for Italy and the Italian fans who love their football. But sometimes I think Italian fans love their clubs more than their nation. I don't know if there's more loyalty there that way, but even so, you know, the country expects better. And an Italian federation report this year found that Serie A had the oldest average squad age in Europe's top leagues. And adding to that, the report also found out that a third of Serie A players are even eligible for the Italy team. So, you know, there's not a lot to choose from sort of that homegrown talent. And that their league ranks near the bottom globally for minutes given to under 21 players, which obviously is the foundation, the bedrock of your future competition. So, all those stats are quite alarming, and I've just sort of cherry picked three of them. There were lots of other alarming factors within that report. And going back to appointing Roberto Mancini for a second time does smack of scraping the barrel to a point. But he has had proven success as well as disappointment, as you've pointed out, with the Italian national team. And he managed Italy from 2018 to 2023. During that time, sorry to reinforce that he won Euro 2020. Cover your ears, James, by beating England at Wembley. I wasn't there, but I watched on TV. I know you were. And he also led them to that world beaten, I think it was a 37 game unbeaten run.
It was, yeah.
But it wasn't glory. All glory, as you said. He also failed to qualify for the 2022 World Cup, losing a playoff to North Macedonia. But actually didn't lose his job over that, James. I have to sort of deflect that point, I think you said. He actually resigned in 2023 himself to take the Saudi Arabian job for a bigger paycheck. So you stand or sit corrected there. And then replacing Maldini as technical director is, guess who? It's Claudio Ranieri, who's 74 years old. Claudio, I'm sure you know, James, but listeners may remember he led Leicester City to their fairy tale Premier League title win in 2015-2016 season before being unceremoniously sacked by them in 2017. But since leaving Leicester, my goodness, he's got around. He's managed several other clubs, including Nantes, Fulham, Roma, Sampdoria, Watford, Cagliari in Sardinia. I think that's the capital of Sardinia. Bit of geography there for you. But I was under the impression that that job in Sardinia was likely to be his final club. But he then came out again out of retirement for another reign at Roma. So he clearly feels he still has something to give. Otherwise, why would he take up this position with the Italian national side? I mean, he is 74, but he's obviously a very youthful 74, and it must be very hard, having had a lifetime of experience in football, to walk away from one of the biggest jobs in town that there is. So, I've got mixed feelings about these two appointments.
Yeah, I would actually say that I don't mind these two appointments in regard to they're both very experienced. And I think Italy have, in relation to their players, quite a youthful player selection right now. And so I think a bit of experience is necessary. Claudio Ranieri's obviously had a fantastic career, notably Leicester winning the Premier League. And in Mancini's favour as well, he led Man City to their first Premier League title in 2012, and that was a crazy day. Mum, you're a QPR fan, so you'll remember it well when Sergio Aguero scored the last minute winner. But you stayed up anyway, so it wasn't the end of the world for QPR. But going back to that, he also enjoyed success with Lazio, Inter Milan, winning the Coppa Italia with both these sides, and 3 Serie A titles with Inter. But in 2026, is their return actually a fresh start, or is it just familiar faces papering over the bigger cracks?
Well, the Federation, as you mentioned, promised a bold new era and instead delivered a chaotic fortnight, 2 high-profile resignations and a return to 2 men who've been here before. The structural problems, youth development, ageing squads, limited pathways for young Italian players hasn't gone anywhere. So I think whoever's in the dugout, those issues are still waiting to be fixed. So I'm probably slightly less optimistic than you are. But just going back to Pirlo, controversy aside, do you think he was the right call in the first place? I mean, I think you know more about him than I do.
Yeah, controversy aside, I'd still say no, he wasn't. Obviously sacked after just 1 season at Juventus, and his points per game record was something like 2 at Juventus, which is actually quite good, but he wasn't successful there. He also left the Turkish side, Fatih Karagümrük. Forgive me, listeners, if I pronounce that.
Yes, at last you can't pronounce something. Hurrah, join the club.
He was there after just a year and sacked again at Sampdoria as well, and then a spell at Dubai United. So he's got quite an attacking style of play, but style of play doesn't mean anything. And I don't think he had enough in his experience or to show for being the Italian head coach. In the meantime, though, staying in Europe, Jurgen Klopp has been confirmed as Germany's new coach on a deal which runs until the end of the 2030 World Cup, securing a return to management for the first time since he left Liverpool in 2024. And his first match in charge will be against the Netherlands in September, who will obviously be likely to captain by his former boy, Virgil van Dijk. So that'll be fantastic to watch. But will he be the answer to Germany's woes, Nadine?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of Jurgen Klopp. He's won a Premier League, UEFA Champions League and FIFA Club World Cup, among other trophies. But he's stepping into one of the toughest jobs in world football right now. I mean, let's not forget Germany crashed out of the World Cup to Paraguay in penalties. But on paper, I mean, there's nobody better in German football with more credibility to work into a dressing room and demand belief again. Although he was very critical of Germany as a punter, as a commentator. So now he's going to feel, on the other end, on the receiving end. The other thing I'd like to point out, this isn't club football. Klopp built his reputation on the training ground, day in and day out. He's renowned for building that emotional connection with a squad he saw week in and week out. Everyone talked about Liverpool's culture. Everybody talked about how important every person, from the person sort of sweeping the floors, the chef, to the managers and everybody else in between, were as important as each other. And international management is totally different to that. It's a totally different beast. You get your players, for a handful of days every few months? He's got 2 years to build towards Euro 2028. And I think Germany will want quick results. That's a chance to reset the culture, but is that enough time? 2 years will go by in a flash, particularly as he's not spending day in, day out with those players. And going back to the match coming up in September, the football rivalry between the Netherlands and Germany is one of Europe's oldest and most intense international fixtures. Often people think, it's England versus Germany. It's not. Germany will say it's the Netherlands game that really gets their back up. So I think Klopp will want to get off to a good start, but the real verdict will be at the next Euros in 2 years' time, due to be held in the UK and Ireland, where I think we can really assess what has Klopp done in a short space of time.
Yeah, well, obviously as an Everton fan, I hope he miserably fails.
How generous of you.
But speaking of new signings, Xabi Alonso has officially begun his life as Chelsea's new manager. And speaking to the club's media on day one, he did not hide his excitement, calling it a genuine privilege to join a club with the kind of history and success Chelsea has built over the last 2 decades. I personally am a huge fan of this appointment. Nadine, what are your initial thoughts on Xabi Alonso at Chelsea?
Yeah, I think this might turn out to be one of the most fascinating appointments the Premier League has seen in years. Remember, this is the man who's won the Bundesliga title with Bayer Leverkusen a couple of years back in the 2023-24 campaign. And at the time, it was regarded as a genuinely historic achievement with 28 wins, 6 draws and 0 defeats. And I think I said to you, we've got to go for a weekend. We never made it, but it's still on my to-do list to sort of experience the Leverkusen way. And I think that success in Germany made him one of the most in-demand coaches in world football. But after that, he only lasted around 7 months in Real Madrid. So are Chelsea taking a chance on him? Alonso has made it very clear that he wants a squad at Chelsea with the right balance between quality and mentality. And already thinks Chelsea are starting the new season with good energy. So he obviously clearly is very, very excited about this, his own appointment. And when you look at Chelsea's business this summer, it's been relentless, hasn't it? When I last looked, Chelsea squad was numbering nearly 40 players. I think I've got my maths right, which probably means a serious trim is coming for the transfer window, which shuts on the 1st of September, so a month away. Alonso himself admitted there'll be plenty more movement yet. So it does seem like it's going to be a revolving door. And that plan, it sounds like, will keep evolving right up to deadline day in September. So James, I've got several questions for you on this. So do you think Alonso is the right fit at Chelsea? And what do you think of his signings so far? And what impact will they have? Sorry, there's a few questions there, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
I think with the players that Chelsea have in terms of his tactics, I think he's a great fit. So Xavi Alonso plays a back three, a 3-4-3 system, three centre backs, wing backs, and we've seen wing backs work fantastically well in the past at Chelsea. Obviously, when Antonio Conte was there and won the Premier League with them, that system there was in place. And I just think he was so good at Leverkusen. I know what happened at Real Madrid was difficult, but they have big egos at Real Madrid. And Xabi Alonso himself is, he's a humble guy. He's not necessarily someone to manage egos. He's a tactician, but it didn't work out at Real Madrid. I still believe he has so much more to offer. And I think the signings are really interesting. I think Morgan Rogers coming into Chelsea is a really, really interesting signing. I mean, when you're paying £117 million, that's the club saying we want to win the league. We want this player to be our difference and win the league for us. And him and Cole Palmer, obviously off the pitch, I don't know if you knew this, Nadine, but they're best of friends. They were in the academy for Man City. And so, yeah, that'll be interesting to see their partnership particularly. And we expect they'll be playing together. Rodgers will be on the left side and Palmer on the right side, and those two can interchange as the two tens. But they've also signed fullback Marco Palestra from Atlanta, Maxence Lacroix from Crystal Palace for £50 million at the age of 26, which interestingly is the Blues' oldest signing since 2022, and he's penned a contract until 2032. So the spending is a real sign of intent. Valentin Barco's also on their radar, who was part of Argentina's World Cup winning squad, which could see them having two Argentinian midfielders. So maybe Chelsea will be a side that teams don't want to come up against because of that Argentine aspect. But yeah, I think Chelsea have real potential, and actually, I'm going to say it myself here now. I don't want to say dark horses because they're a big club, but they're my outsider to win the Premier League. I really do believe that. And when we look at Lacroix, for example, he joined Palace from Wolfsburg in 2024 for an initial 15.5 million. So well done to Palace for making that profit. And he was fantastic. He made 55 appearances in all competitions and obviously won the Conference League, which was the club's first ever major European trophy. He made 3 appearances for France during the 2026 World Cup. And I think when I saw players like Reece James, like Morgan Rogers, I'm just really happy to be also in a way in their story, to write part of the Chelsea story with them is what he said. And he also said he's really proud, really happy to be part of this beautiful project. And he just wants to start playing and he's happy to see the guys. He went on for a while and he was really, really delighted to join by the sounds of it. And I think Chelsea supporters are also supporting this signing. Deals for winger Giovanni Quenda, too, from Sporting, and striker Emmanuel Mega from Strasbourg were agreed in 2025, with both players formally completing moves this month. They've obviously also offloaded Alejandro Garnacho to Aston Villa, who was struggling to say the least at Chelsea. And they're also in talks to bring in a bit of experience too. Brighton striker Danny Welbeck and Brentford midfielder Jordan Henderson, who, wow, he's had some career, Jordan Henderson, considering half the time he's not even on the pitch. I'm not, that's me trying to get my thoughts across that I'm not a huge Jordan Henderson fan, but he must add something to the dressing room because he's had a wide range of clubs up his sleeve, and bringing that experience in actually is something that I think is going to do Chelsea wonders for the dressing room. They've won, they've been in big games. Danny Welbeck's played at Old Trafford. Jordan Henderson's won the Premier League and he's been part of World Cups. He's won the Champions League. So, yeah, really, really interesting. What are your thoughts, Nadine?
Well, being a QPR fan, obviously there's a deep-seated hatred towards Chelsea, but obviously I have to put that to one side. Any of my QPR friends listening to this podcast will be in horror the way that you're talking up Chelsea at the moment. The weird thing is Chelsea don't give a damn about QPR anymore because we don't often have the chance to play them now, being in separate leagues. But actually, yes, I mean, it's interesting hearing your assessment of those players. And it does sound like Alonso knows what he's doing. Although, some of those players that you mentioned, a couple of them, they were already in the bag back in 2025. I think you mentioned someone from Sporting and Emmanuel from Strasbourg. That was agreed in 2025. So that's got to be before his era. So, would he be into those signings? Help me there, James. What is that about?
Yeah, well, those signings, as you said, they are before his era, but they hadn't been formally completed. And if he was strongly against them, Chelsea could have found a way to wiggle themselves out of that, but they haven't. And I think Giovanni Quenda from Sporting is a perfect example of a Xabi Alonso type player. He can play in the 10, he can play at wing back. And Xabi Alonso, what we saw at Bayer Leverkusen was the wing backs, notably Grimaldo, Frimpong, those two, Grimaldo being the left wing back, Frimpong being the right wing back, these really fast, energetic players that can go up and down the pitch. So I think they are Xabi Alonso signings for sure, Nadine.
Yeah. So the mood inside the Chelsea dressing room already sounds very upbeat. The season hasn't started yet. We're talking about the third week in August. And I'm just thinking the likes of centre-back Levi Colwill saying Chelsea are ready to challenge Arsenal. I mean, you've already said they could potentially be sort of the dark horses for the season. But just bearing in mind, this is the bit I do like to remind people, Chelsea only finished 10th place last season. Yes, with a different manager, with 52 points. And they missed out on all European competitions for this season, which I suppose in one respect they can then focus on the Premier League and domestic competitions and not be overstretched by all those European commitments. But is this just fighting talk from Levi Colwill, or do you see Chelsea as real contenders this season? I mean, I think you've sort of already answered that, but I'd like you to have another go at it. Really think about what you've just said.
Yeah, I do see them as real contenders this season. And there's something about Xabi Alonso and Chelsea that does just excite me in the way they're buying players and attacking nature of players. It excites me a bit more than the Arsenal team that won it last year, for example, who were built on foundations of strong, robust defence, set pieces. Whereas I don't think this Chelsea side will be like that. I think they'll be an extensively attacking side. Even their back three are very much ball-playing players. Levi Colwill's fantastic, and had he been not injured last season, I certainly believed he would have been in the England squad in the World Cup. So Chelsea, for me, is one to keep a really, really close eye on. I think they could have a good start and potentially a title-winning team this season. But interestingly, Nadine, it's not only Chelsea that are spending eye-watering amounts. The Premier League transfer costs have also soared dramatically over the last couple of years, reaching record highs by massive domestic and international spending, with individual fees regularly going over that 100 million barrier. And just to make my point, let's look at a few players. We had Alexander Isak, who was £125 million from Newcastle to Liverpool. Rodgers, as we mentioned, 117. Elliot Anderson from Forest to Man City for 116 million, which could rise to 125 with performance-related add-ons. Tonali, Newcastle to Tottenham for 100 million. Mateus Fernandes from West Ham to Tottenham. And don't forget, West Ham were in the Championship, so they didn't really have much bargaining power. But to get £85 million out of a midfielder, considering they're in the Championship, is just, to me, I've already said the word, which you love, bonkers. What do you think, Nadine?
Bonkers! Yeah, the word of today is bonkers. Well, yeah, the money spent on players, like you've just highlighted, Morgan Rodgers, Elliot Anderson and Sandro Tonali, they're huge, aren't they? But what it really shows is just how much richer the Premier League has gotten. I mean, deals that would have been unthinkable a decade ago are now just sort of normal business. Think back to, was it 2021, when Jack Grealish leaves Villa for Man City, and he became Britain's, am I right in thinking, first 100 million footballer? And at that time, that felt like a seismic moment. And just fast forward just 5 years, and these are not headline-grabbing anomalies anymore, are they? They're just part of how the Premier League does business now. I mean, these figures are just daft bonkers to me, but they're not to Premier League clubs and players. But no club has crossed the 200 million threshold yet. But given how fast the ceiling keeps rising, that first 200 million transfer doesn't feel like science fiction anymore. It feels like a matter of when, not if. And then we'll start saying, oh, well, that's just business as usual. But I mean, it's huge amounts of money, aren't they? Think how many nurses and doctors and care workers you could get for that. Sorry, I'm bringing it down to reality. But I mean, these are just sort of pie in the sky figures for you and me, but not if you're in the business of football.
Yeah, and I definitely think we could see that 200 million figure because, with all due respect to players like Elliot Anderson, Sandro Tonali, Morgan Rogers, they're not even them. They're not the biggest players in the Premier League. If Erling Haaland decided he wanted to go to Real Madrid and he still had years left on his contract, which he does, because he obviously signed a huge contract a couple of years ago, then yeah, he'd be ridiculous money. You think it'd be around £200 million for sure. Neymar obviously was when he went from Barcelona to PSG, which was the only time we saw that threshold being passed. So yeah, that's an inevitable for me. Let's now briefly revisit Spygate, which we spoke about in our first ever episode, because this topic's not going away either for Southampton, with their head coach Tunde Care now officially charged with misconduct by the UK's Football Association over his role in the whole saga. Nadine, can you bring us up to speed with the latest news on Spygate?
Yeah, do you call him Eckhart or Eckert?
Sorry, I called him Eckert. I think it's just Eckert. I think I was trying too much there with the accent.
Yes, twice I've picked you up now on
That's
pronunciation.
two now, yeah.
This is my area to mispronounce.
Your bad habits are laying on to me.
Yes, I've brought you up so well that I'm spreading my bad habits at last. Yes, sorry. Cast your minds back to May. Southampton, otherwise known as the Saints, which is ironic in this case, were already thrown out of the Championship playoffs after admitting they'd spied on 3 different clubs during the season. And an independent disciplinary commission didn't hold back at the time, calling it a contrived and determined plan that came from the top down. And since then, the FA has been digging into exactly who was involved and how each person knew, and how much, each person knew. And now Eckhart, pronounced correctly, is facing 3 separate charges under FA rule, I think it's E3.1, for misconduct between December 2025 and May 2026. Specifically, the Football Association says he directed or authorised the observation of training sessions at Oxford United, Ipswich Town and Middlesbrough, all ahead of matches against those clubs in December, April and May respectively. And we're still waiting to find out what will happen to Eckhart. So we'll be following those developments in the coming weeks, but he could miss the start of Southampton's 2026-27 campaign, which is mid-August it starts, because obviously it's a week ahead of the Premier League, the EFL, because, we're still awaiting the Independent Disciplinaries Commission's verdict. And ultimately, I mean, he could receive up to a 12-month suspension or ban from football-related activities, but let's wait and see. I don't know if it'll be any more than that, but, it's likely it could be around that sort of ballpark figure of 12 months.
Wow, well, if our episodes are like this in the pre-season, I'm worried that during the Premier League season, it's going to take 3 hours just to do one episode. There's so much to talk about, and Spygate, as you said, will continue to evolve, and we'll be waiting for that ban or suspension to be confirmed, or possibly not. But as you said, let's wait or see. But thank you for listening to this week's Football Fan Fanatics podcast, and thank you again, Nadine, for your contribution today. To make sure all our episodes drop right into your feed, you can follow our show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen online. And to find out more about us, please visit our website, footballfanfanatics.com. Don't forget, you can also watch us on our Football Fan Fanatics YouTube channel too. If you're connected with football and you'd like to appear on the show, please get in contact with us. All the details are on the website. Thanks again. See you next time, Nadine.
Bye.